Great. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the amazing. How do we get this going?
You just go there. I can do all the intros. You got
Okay,
it.
great. Thank you so much. Let's give her a round of applause.
How do I switch it to this thing though? Do you just
Display
go
settings.
Right, if you never wanted to do that when I was in my lecture hall. Okay, hopefully we won't have too much dinging, but here we go. Okay, set. All right, so I'm coming to you today to talk a little bit, mostly like I'm kind of trying to broad stroke some discussion points, maybe just some art that you can kind of carry forward and be inspired by or consider further, knowing that you have a wide variety of interests and things. I try to do that. So if any of this feels a little upchucky, like too much information, it's hopefully that it's out there so that you will grab a couple of things that are interesting to you that can kind of provoke moving forward. Because I know how much discussion matters, but also it's the week right before spring break. And I was sort of expecting some of you to be like, okay, but maybe some of these things will linger in your mind and you'll want to talk about them later. So if you're kind of exhausted today, I get it. We've all been there. We know what it feels like. Anyway, so what I wanted to do is show you this piece of art. This is a piece of art that includes an ice block surrounded by microphones. If you walked into a gallery and you saw this, what would you be questioning? What might you think it's about?
My thought was, so are they trying to record the sound of the ice melting or the sound of the ice cracking?
Okay, so an interesting idea. Hearing that question, does this raise any other further thoughts or what you might think it's about?
Yeah. A piece on how often the melting of the polar ice caps is covered in the media.
Okay, so the idea that we often hear about the sounds of ice melting, and are we recording that? Are we talking about that? Is this news? Should this be news more often, right? These things start coming into our mind. Anyone else? Anyone else in this room just going, is this art? Are you serious? This is like seriously art? Anybody there? If you are, admit it, it's fine. Yes.
So my brain went a totally different direction. I saw it as like, the ice is like, it's melting, it's suffering, it's vulnerable, it's facing destruction, and these microphones are like giving it like attention and voice, and so that it can like.
Right. It's a lot of microphones. It's not just
Yeah.
one microphone. It's not like it's just like one person standing up to the karaoke stage and it's like gonna let it go, right? Like this is something else. But this piece is actually called The Sound of Ice Melting. So I love that that was your first thought. Like you were thinking the title when you had your consideration. And it's one of those pieces that I see and it provokes me in other ways. And it's one of those things that I wanted to go forward. So often when we look at art, we're bringing whatever we know to it. So our contemporary understanding lands on top of that artwork, and that's how we unpack it. But art is also sort of situated in the time it was made, and it is part of a conversation at that moment that it is made, and it's authentic to that. But we will often re-adopt how we perceive it. And I have heard these kind of conversations about, not only is it about about ice melting and glaciers melting, it might also be just about like the curatorial practice of how do you actually govern that? I mean, is anybody thinking about when that ice does melt, like what kind of electrical issues we're gonna have? Are we like, what are we doing to the floor of this gallery? What's happening? And this piece has always provoked me because when I was in grad school at University of Georgia, Paul Koss, the artist of this piece, he was one of our visiting artists that year when I was in grad school, and couldn't be a nicer human being, could not be a more inspired human being. But this piece of art was not really about all the things I thought it was. But I was in the room the day that it was bought by the Guggenheim Museum of Art, and he got a phone call and found out that this like incredible museum was buying that piece. So there is a gallery in New York City that owns this. They own the mics, and then anytime they show it, they have to then freeze the ice block and continuously show it every day. But they have an agreement to do that when it is on display. Art and conversation can be a lot of fun. But when we think about it, I've always looked at this and I went to your thoughts about it. I wanted this to be a comment that thinks about something other than just being in the gallery and being this sort of art object. I questioned if it has some kind of comment. Is it eco art? And as you study art, like I have done and I continue to do, there are a lot of like words that we throw around as we try to understand what headspace we want to bring these art pieces into and how we want to label them. And I'm about to kind of, again, like I said, I'm going to throw a lot at you today, is just think about all these different ways in which we try to like label what kind of art that is. Because so often we want to categorize it before we feel like we can talk about it further, even though we might have these quick instincts that inspire us to think about it in one specific way. We want to know the title, but we also want to know where it's trying to situate itself in conversation. And when I think about eco art, I think of artists such as these. This is Aurora Robson. She is very dedicated in her practice to take previously used items and make them beautiful. So she will take plastic and she will collect it and she will create pieces like you see on the left. She will also collect junk mail and create collages, and she has an epic series of just junk mail collages that she's creating. And when she's thinking about eco art, and is the way I've kind of tried to define that for myself, is being sustainable in the materials that you're using, right? Like being aware of your carbon footprint as a maker, which not all artists do, but some really are passionate about. And she's actually part of a collective called Project Vortex. If you want to go on their website and check it out, it's a really great location to look through a bunch of artists who've made this agreement that they are going to be aware of our plastic consumption and the way we handle pollution, and they do a lot of community-based practice, and also making some interesting art objects where the materials they're pulling from are maybe secondhand or aren't going to kind of create a further, I don't know, a further problem in the way in which we buy into what we're creating and communicating through. But in this idea of eco art, when I hear it thrown around, some people kind of confuse it quickly or want to label it environmental art or environmental art practice. And an artist that I like to connect with that idea is the artist Mel Chen. Mel Chen has worked in a variety of ways to create artworks that are interventions within environments where he goes to very specific communities, asks specific problems about what's happening at those locations, and then figures out how he can, in one small way, do a gesture that might communicate a need for the broader community, that if someone were to approach his small gesture, they might start having larger conversations that can impact the environment in which those people live. Much of his work cannot be packaged up and sent to a new gallery and have the same conversation. Paul Koss's Sound of Ice Melting, we could pack that up and show that elsewhere, but his work is really rooted in where it is located. And this project here, this revitalization field that he worked on, he's actually taking a hazardous waste landfill and trying to work with other researchers to find ways in which they can rehabilitate that landscape a bit. And again, small gesture and scale, but as an artwork, it poses a question. It frames a moment for us to sit and contemplate and think about what's possible. And also to think through eco art, we often hear these terms interchangeable in dialogue. People start thinking about when they hear eco art, they must assume it might be land art or earthworks. Have any of you heard of these terms with art at all? Any of you studied art history or maybe been part of Art 100? You might have heard land art or earthworks. This is a very well-known art movement, typically in the 70s, where art found its way outside of galleries and into landscapes. You're looking at a piece here by Walter Di Maria where he put lightning rods into a field, and you can go stay in a cabin and hope art happens if lightning decides to strike any of those lightning rods. Does this better the environment? Does it change the environment? This is an art movement that originally was just trying to change the art world, take it out of the white-walled gallery cube space, get rid of that kind of institutionalized structures. But now when we look at it, you'll hear people comment on some of the inappropriate things that land art did, because they weren't so worried about some of the species that might have problems with what interventions they created and what they did to some of the landscape. but it was of a different time, right? But I often see students when they look at it now wanting it to be something else. And because they're so excited about artwork that is engaged with the environment or interested in sustainable practice, they will use these labels on the new contemporary artworks because they see it better serving the land or better serving the earth. But we confused it back in the 70s. Similar to what Paul Koss was doing. Awesome artwork. I am not belittling it in any form at all, right? But when I see this work, what he's really doing is conceptual art. He wants to do things that kind of mess with you to think about concepts. And I love that now when I show conceptual artworks like this to students, to anyone in a contemporary audience, they want it to be something else because we're aware of what else is going on. So I really think more or less in regards to talking about or thinking through art, it's really whatever lens you have to bring to it. And I know I'm standing in a room with people who probably know even more than I do or should know about what's going on in the environment. And more artists actually need to learn from you all on how to better focus our work so we can get it into the right kind of conversations, right? We all have something to bring forward, and I think if we can collaborate and talk through it, we'll make some better work in the future. So I was introduced kind of quickly. This is me. This is actually not me. This is not my artwork. This is another self-portrait by another artist, but I just feel akin to it sometimes. I go all over the place. I teach a lot of different things. I make a lot of different things in my practice. And I don't know if anyone would actually look at any of my artwork and say, oh, that's Stacy Isenbarger. She's eco art all the way. No, I'm interested in it. I love it. I love teaching it. I'm happy to talk about it. But if you go in and look at my work, you're going to realize it's more driven by my suburban upbringing in South Carolina. That's me, the little one in that lovely yard with the very well-trimmed shrubbery that my mother really needed to perfect. But I'm often in my own work thinking about sort of my own personal environment, that domestic space, and what that very nice front yard did to make us be welcomed by our neighbors in our lovely Southern Baptist town as Catholics. We were heathens. We had to clean up. We had to deal. But when I saw works like earthworks and land art, I loved it for other reasons and it inspired me to do different things. And I'm hoping today, if you see some other artwork that inspires you, I wonder what you would do now, today, with it. Because we all are going to take something from what we see. So this here are two pieces by Robert Smithson. Maybe some of you have actually been able to see Spiral Jetty. This is in Salt Lakes in Utah. Depending on the seasons, you can still see this reemerge. This is about 150 meters of dirt that has been collected and then repiled into this lovely spiral on that landscape. Here on the left, this is a piece called Site Non-Site. And what he was trying to do was express to the gallery space, hey, get out into nature. So he collected photos of a different landscape and brought them back into the gallery. And he did it in an aesthetic that at the time was very minimalist, and that's what people wanted. I loved learning about this stuff because I was like, wait, people go outside, they go into the wild, they take their landscape, they do something with it, right? They also at the time, like Christo and Jean-Claude, were covering islands with fabric, working with communities to do this. Does anyone see this is beautiful? Any of you skeptical right now? What are they burying under fabric? Is that okay? Artists were like, wow, pretty, amazing. Like, we saw all the studies. They would actually draw these beautiful, gorgeous images, raise all the funding necessary to make this happen, pull this off, take the aerial photos, gorgeous. But I look at it now and I go, who do they suffocate out of that island? Like, what are we up to here, artists? But meanwhile, I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking about it. What do I want to do? So I'm like digging up yard when I'm in undergrad and like putting it in a gallery and calling it my own artwork. That's my big gesture. I also try to do weird performances where I'd hang out with friends and like jam rocks into a weird dress form that I would make. I don't know. I loved venerating things from nature. So I would take rocks that I could find that felt like the right size and I'd cover them in velvet, and then I would strip bare things that would happen in our home environment, like a mattress and a kitchen table. That metal piece is exactly the height of my kitchen table at the time, and try to talk about these places where we commune on the daily in our lives, right? Like, should we be outside more often than when we're inside? And you know, you ask these questions, you play around with materials. I'd go out into the landscape and do strange little interventions after reading books that inspired me. If you haven't read it, As Eve Said to the Serpent by Rebecca Solnit is amazing. It's a lot of little essays about artists doing interesting things with the environment. There's also a book, What We Want Is Free. There's various editions of this, but highly suggest those. But I'd stay inspired and do things with the landscape. But again, I'm still this little suburbanite who doesn't quite know how I want to make art or be inspired by it. But then one day I went for a walk with a faculty member who's now retired from this institution, but her name is Penny Morgan. Maybe some of you know her. But she took me up a hill and she said, look back. And she showed me the burn scars on trees. I did not grow up in an environment that dealt with a lot of fire. I did not understand the concepts of prescribed burns. But back in 2016 and 2017, I got to work with her for a year and follow along with what she was doing with her students. And we would go into the experimental forest. I would go on prescribed burns. I would learn about these processes. We'd have conversations about fire scars and the lines that were being drawn on the landscape to help other trees thrive, other landscapes maybe become something that is less fearful to hike through. We would talk about ideas of loss and awe. We would create drawings that would almost manifest our discussions. We would actually grab charcoal from the woods and use it as mark-making devices. Similar to maybe some of the other artwork that you've been looking at, right? Like these moments where we could think about an idea and then maybe hallmark it through the art of making. And sometimes some people might perceive that as ecological art, but in my mind, it's just art. It makes a comment, right? And most of us artists are just drawn to a certain material, and we need to make through it to communicate what we're understanding. And for me, sewing is something that I was doing a lot as a child, and dealing with other kind of fabrics that I can use to sort of cover the front windows to make my home pleasing, things that I've learned from my mother, are ways in which I kind of understand and highlight my own kind of ideas through art making. So after working with her, we showed our art that we made together. Mind you, I did most of the structured things that you see in this space, but we found wood from slash piles that had not completely burnt through, and we borrowed them to create an installation at once upon a time it was the Pritchard Gallery, and then it was the Moscow Contemporary, and now it's a vacant space that I'm still not quite ready to talk about. Making comments on things that I was learning from understanding how strong bark is in regards to how it protects trees, like these kind of cracks and fractures that fire can open up and bring hope into a space that maybe we don't see in that way when it's previously happening. And all of this work was just a kind of meditation and a testament to what we had talked about over the course of the year. Does it go back and challenge you to think about fire? Maybe in some ways, maybe not. But I'm making art that's a comment to something. It's my discussion with the ideas that are being presented to me. There's so much else out there that challenges others. And the work that we did together has inspired various smaller works for me, but I don't know if it's necessarily changing or pulling me completely away from my unique desire to still comment on that suburban landscape, that yard right in front of your living room where you greet your neighbors, right? I'm still making comments on ideas about things that are maybe eroding, or these things that we try in regards to environmental activism. This little piece that doesn't look like much here on the left, Gold Star for Trying, is an attempt to talk about that person who tries to step up and make a big cause known, and then unfortunately their Gold Star for Trying doesn't last. Like the balloon over time just falls over. It's kind of a womp-womp moment. But I'm making my comments. I'm thinking about bringing people together again and having conversations. This is a piece I did where I severed a porch swing in half. I've lived in South Carolina. I've lived in Georgia. That porch swing really mattered for us in conversation, but I would love us to come back together and talk about things. For example, this piece here was shown first in Georgia, and at the time it was being claimed as a purple state, but when you talk about a purple state, you're not actually talking about two colors coming together. You're talking about a blue being over here and a red being over here. And this was like my little ode to, could we come together again and talk, sway, whatnot, I don't know. So that's where I'm at. That's where I've been. But I think I got invited to talk to you today because I'm also a member of the Confluence Lab here on campus. And part of my job in working with that Confluence Lab is I just like highlighting stories of conversations that are happening with artists that are looking at what's happening to our environment from various different distances. Whether that is seeing something from a distance and wanting to paint exactly what they've seen, right? Challenging something through something that they're making. We did a 3-part online exhibition that you can check out live now, but we're also even more excited about what's coming next. We're gonna be hosting 10 artists and writers over the next year where they are being funded to go do a Trex training in their community in the Pacific Northwest region, and then bring that knowledge and experience of boots on the ground and then making a work of art or a series or writing about it, and then hosting some community events where they're at to sort of showcase an artist that's actually living into like really being part of something in an immersive way. So can't really report on that, but I'm really excited about reporting on that in the future. So it's something to be checking out. But where all this comes together, and again, throwing a lot at you, but just hoping something sticks, is the idea that I love that you all are working on these like quilt squares, right? You're making something that shares a message, but then also kind of hides itself in a hug, right? Like that blanket of knowledge is something that can all collectively come together. I don't know if you all thought about that when you're making your quilt square. Like these very specific ideas that you're thinking about are going to come together and be presented to the world as like some kind of warm, happy idea, passing on of knowledge, like a quilt. I don't know, but I do think there's a case to be made, and something I even try to challenge myself with, even though I don't think my work necessarily does all of this, but how do we kind of start or strike more conversations that land with people? And I think these interesting interventions are where we have a better start. This is a piece that really challenged me in that way. I do not think this fits under any of the categories of environmental art at all that we've been talking about, but I still think it opens up a concept. Have any of you ever been walking down the street and somebody hands you a flyer? They're like standing on the street corner, they're about to hand you something. How many of you actually take the flyer? See that head that's going, absolutely not. You like walk the other direction, maybe like cross the street to get away from that person who's about to hand you something. I'm like the sucker who takes it and smiles and then like stuffs it in my pocket and like I'm out. Like I'm not gonna tell them sorry, but like I'm not really gonna read the thing, right? Others might talk for a while, but this artist understanding that concept, he dressed himself up, he put on headphones, he like showed up on a street corner and looked like that guy. He did wear a special suit for the event that says I need you on the back of it, but he tried to hand out these sheets of paper for about 4 hours in New York City. And this was a kind of social experiment that he was trying to do. So 4 hours and 41 minutes, he handed out 750 sheets of paper. And if they had bothered to read it when he handed it to them, they would have actually seen this document that said, we are social sculpture and I need you to talk to me to complete this work of art. And I'm not going to read the whole thing out. You can check out Ben Kitmont if you want to see more about it. But he asked them to talk to him, and if they were willing to just talk to him for a minute, and they would give their address and sign this document that they had participated in just a simple conversation with him about art, they would be part of this artwork. And he actually showed this signature list and discussion point of the paper that he handed out in an art gallery, and it sold. And he actually gave parts of the thing that it sold to everyone who participated in it. They only got a $40 check. It wasn't like a big money maker, but I always found it really interesting that in his attempt to try to bring people together and have a better conversation, one, he didn't make a lot of money. Nobody involved really made a lot of money. But unfortunately, even some of the people that he had been involved in this conversation with, many of them got mailed back to him because odds are they were probably the homeless population that was willing to stop and talk to him the longest. But what do we do when we actually start taking art out of the gallery scene and not necessarily making ourselves super famous, but what are the impacts of that? Did that conversation start something? We don't know, but there's a lot of hope in some of these artworks that sort of step out into the environment and try to do something else. And instead of calling these things an eco art or environmental art, there's all sorts of titles being thrown around for work like this, work that is starting to reactivate our sense of how we are affecting our community. And I do think what you are doing here with Climate Fuss is thinking more about how communities are impacted when we're questioning things. And you will hear titles like this land in a lot of locations. One of them in particular is social sculpture, and this is a term that was deemed by the artist Joseph Beuys. He's a strange performance artist. He's done all sorts of weird things, like hanging out with a coyote for 4 days in a gallery in New York City. He survived, but he had a shepherd's crook and a cloak. Longer stories there. But my favorite piece he's ever done is he worked with, in Germany, he's from Germany. He put all of these, it looks like piles of logs, but those are all large stones. And he shook hands with people in politics and said, for every rock, if you want to move any of these rocks away one by one, you have to plant a tree. And he worked with the community to make this happen. Although I'm guessing as a famous artist, that's probably the only tree actually physically planted himself. But he got a bunch of community members to do it with him. And if you go through streets in Germany, you will often see a rock next to a tree. And that is an ode to the fact that it came from that project. He used his platform as an artist to make this happen. I still go into some galleries today though and see those rocks left over and I go, did he plant all of them? I haven't found the data yet, but I don't think all of them landed. But I like the idea of it, right? Like, how do we start to affect change in big or small ways? Most projects that we make as artists, they carry some really beautiful ideas, but the lift that really makes an impact in the environment needs multiple hands. It needs to be a community gathering to make it happen. And a lot of artists have asked those questions about how do we start to engage with the community? How do we let people know as an artist that we're here to help them and support them? Marilee Euclides is an artist that is well known for making those impacts, at least posing or getting questions posed. She's done various performance art works where she's thinking about ways in which we engage with the community. And one of her approaches to thinking about how she could better connect is that she tried to shake every sanitation worker's hand in her area in talking to them, and she claimed that that was an artwork. And she's a very rich practice, but it was one of those pieces where many people were going, wait a second, is this act actually art? This woman going around and talking to people in the community saying hello and trying to make this like sort of hidden labor become seen. What's the benefit of that? One of my favorite moments of learning about this work was listening to an interview in the local news one evening where this interviewer asked one of the guys who had shaken her hands, like, but was it artistic? Like, was it an artistic moment, this exchange that you had? And the guy just looks back at the interviewer and says, I mean, there was a lot of feeling in it. But there's a ripple effect too. Maybe there's something important about documenting these moments. If you really think about it, we all document. I mean, how many pictures do you take on a daily now? Like, how many selfies of you do you own? And if it's not you, how many do your friends own? Like, you understand this culture, right? Like, we document so much, and what are we celebrating with the things that we're taking the time to document? And maybe some of these hidden things that are happening in layers of the environment need to be things that we are talking about. There can be a lot of generosity in art, but art typically is perceived as something you don't touch and you stay away from. This is an artwork by Felix Gonzalez Torres, again, not eco art, but known for its as generosity. This pile of candy, if you see a pile of candy in a gallery, you can actually be really cool. Go pick it up. It's probably one of his works, but this is another one of those contracts with the gallery where they have to keep the pile stocked and able to feed the audience. But this is considered a portrait, and Felix Gonzalez Torres' partner died of AIDS, and this was a portrait of his partner, and he wanted people to come over and take a bit of candy and savor a bit of sweetness in memorial of him, right? And I think that idea of just those quick moments that act as reminders that make us feel something can have quite a lasting effect, in big or small ways. But going back to my buddy here, Paul, still love this guy, so please don't hear this as I hate this piece, because I actually really love this piece, but it's a good little foil for me to debate about what are some other ways in which we maybe could do better work that speaks more towards the environment, because we've got to be aware of the fact that we've got issues, right? We need to be making comments on it. This is an artwork by Sean Euro. It is painted as a dedicated practice on our melting landscape, knowing full well that the time it takes to articulate that, it is going to be something that is going to be ephemeral and it's going to dissipate and disappear. But the understanding of that moment is photographed, right? And it says it happened, even if very few of us will be in the location in which to see it having had happened, right? For us to be part of his ritual of going out and finding the perfect little moment, the quiet space for which he can then go paint this moment, right? And there's so many other ways that we can document things that we are either removing or adding to comment on losses that are happening in our experience. So I know one of the links that you had in this class actually led you to the artwork here on the right. And this is, if you didn't read the details on it, this is a house that's being removed from the New York City water's edge because it will probably be underwater soon. The house can't stand there, it's not gonna stay. But these kind of projects that remind us of like loss can have a benefit. And maybe we need to start having a new label for what this kind of eco art is that is really just quick considerations of change that we need to do because we have to be aware of our impacts, right? Here we were part of a culture in land art and earthworks where we weren't so worried about lack. We were just really excited about bold statements. And I'm mindful of yet another artist that I had to memorize when I was in school as a famous land artist. This is Michael Heiser here on the left. He dug into a landscape. Are you guys excited? It's called double negative. If you line up, the double negatives line up to one negative subtraction sign. I heard about it in school. It was literally on a flashcard I had to memorize to pass class, this guy. But I was more excited when I found out about this work just reading this magazine one day. Some guy came back in and filled it with an inflatable. It was a joke, but it was smart. And he made sure that the bottom of the inflatable was blue so it felt like the sky was filling it back in, but why did we dig into the earth and call it amazing? What were we doing? But there's a mending that maybe needs to happen. But again, taking the time to fill it in and say, hey, point at this, don't miss it, look a little harder. It matters, I love it. And there are so many other ways in which we are thinking about how we move the landscape for different reasons. Again, I'm being open to interpretation here. This is one of those poetic pieces that I love so much. Francis Elise got a group of students from the University of Lima to come together. They each got a shovel, they all got a t-shirt, and together, in unison, they dug into the ground, they picked up the dirt, and they moved it forward, and together they moved a mountain. I would totally go to that moment. I mean, cool, right? But did they move the mountain, and what's the point? But I'm far more excited about this moving of dirt than the Michael Heiser old version of land art. But there's something in our collective discussions that have been building. And I think that we each kind of come in and look at a certain artwork and see something about it that's really exciting for us now, but there's a history of all these other conversations that stirred that thought. And I am fully aware that this artist knew about Michael Heiser digging into that dirt. I know that Sean Patrick Gladys was aware of it when he decided to fill that exact piece with an inflatable. Right? But we're in conversation. So much of it starts to build. So when you look at art, sometimes you're like, this is confusing. What are they up to? They're aware of this larger conversation. We're not all as insane as we look. These are not the shovels from that exhibition, but I would think that those shovels from that moment of collective journeying could be pretty amazing, right? Like as an artwork, that physical shovel seems like an amazing idea. However, this set of shovels is not like a computer-generated image I created to make a point. This was an exhibition. If you walked into this gallery, would any of you be inspired by the shovels? We do weird things. Okay, I'm gonna take that as no. However, if I told you that these shovels were made from melted down guns and reconstituted as shovels, would you be excited? So often it takes the moment to like read what's really going on, but Pedro Reyes worked, again, could not do this all on his own, worked with decommissioned guns and made sure that they turned into shovels that could be used for planting trees. And he needed to get people involved so that they wouldn't have any explosive situations taking place. But they worked through it, they broke it down, they melted it down, they made these shovels, and then they made sure these shovels are continuing to travel currently. We are planting trees globally with these shovels that he has collected and worked to create. Again, most people don't necessarily look at this and go, that's environmental art or that's land art, but it's feeding something, it's stemming from something, it's an interesting idea of exchange, right? So whether it's candy that we can pick up or a shovel that's sitting in a wall, often we will take these things that are the artifacts of these grander ideas and we'll put them in a gallery space, because the gallery space is that one container we can still use to question and share some really interesting ideas that impact us. And I think there's a really great place for us to have those conversations. And these conversations continue to happen, and I could go on for days about all of them, but there's something of value in the gallery in regards to getting this kind of high esteem, but other people are finding ways to go back to people's yards and landscapes. This is a group of artists that have connected, and under one main artist is a project where they've created edible estates where people are using land that isn't those lovely lawns that I'm excited about in my making, but they're using them to feed communities. And I find that that kind of social exchange can be pretty inspiring as well. There's other artists going into cityscapes and thinking about ways that they can create, take galleries over and turn them into laboratory spaces to help communities that are more in a food desert figure out how to feed each other. That's what's happening here with Ha Ha Flood. And I don't know, it comes down to when we get into these spaces where we get to eco art, where people question if it's even art anymore. And I think it's a fun thing to ask. How are we doing on time?
6 minutes.
Okay, just random little thoughts to leave you with. I think I'm gonna skip through some of these, but I could talk about them too. But I think
I can put the slides on Canvas if it's okay.
that's fine. I don't know, just maybe thinking a bit about the material world that's around us and what we can reuse and reconsider. I know many of us love our books, but how many books actually end up in landfills that no longer are being read? This was a group of landscape architects that came together and decided to collect a bunch of those books and turn them into a landscape where they could grow mushrooms from them. I feel like some librarians are dying inside right now, but they'll also tell you how many times they have to move things, right? And when we think about eco art, might be thinking about even things we value, but how we can reuse and work with what we have around us. But this is in its early stages, and this is still kind of in its early stages, but these things will go back to the earth and become something else of benefit. And other artists are working using their own illustrative interests and other things to try to connect with others. The Beehive Design Collective might be something you guys might get excited about. As a community, they're trying to overtell the story and exaggerate certain things so that maybe people have better conversations about other species that we need to survive and help. But this one's probably my favorite as far as a question of how we're dealing with land art. This is an art group called Cooking Sections, even though that doesn't sound like an artist at all. They are doing many projects, which I really would suggest go to their website and check it out. But this is a work called Climavore, where they are taking their art, building a structure, leaving it in space, and then using this. So this is a way to, at high tide versus low tide, they're collecting dinner, basically, in that landscape. And they're doing this kind of project in various terrains, trying to think about how we'll actually build a sustainable interaction with the landscapes as it changes with our current climate crisis. And this site becomes a place where people from local restaurants, chefs come together, and community members come together to sit on those stools and learn how to eat and enjoy the things that are actually landing in those locations and environments. I cannot even give this any service to unpack it during this presentation. I can simply say, go to their website and read about it, because you will dig in and go, whoa, that's happening there, that's happening in this way, I cannot believe it. But I don't know if that necessarily comes full circle, but it's interesting for me whether we take a thing from the environment and put it in a gallery and start a conversation around it, or we take people completely out of the gallery. I think there's some interesting things that we can respond to and get excited about. Yes, as a mass general thought in the landscape of climate fuzz and eco art. But that's it. That's what I have today. We can talk more if later or whatever. I'm around. Yes.
Thanks, Stacy.
Yeah, thanks.
I do have a couple announcements for the students before we head out. There will be no Climate Fest next week because I hope you all are going to be resting and take that time. But in 2 weeks, we will have a representative from TIFO, which is Terragraphics International Foundation, which is a local nonprofit, and she will be coming in to talk about green colonialism and lithium mining in southern Idaho, northern Utah, on some traditional homelands with the Paiutes. Students, I will be putting your midterm grades in today. I hope this is like some food for thought for your final projects for your groups, right? We have a lot of people interested in fire and biodiversity. So maybe think about like what you all as a team could produce that maybe isn't just a PowerPoint presentation and a technical report, but maybe some piece of artwork or performance or what have you. So think about that. We see a lot of interesting trends that I just wanted to lace in. Rebecca Solnit will be reading some of her work. For example, the AIDS Memorial Quilt is the genesis of the climate quilt that we're doing. So we can see that like these lost lives is something that from state negligence is what we're going to be foregrounding in our climate quilt, right? Of like what's at stake with global climate change. And that's like in deep reverence to the AIDS Memorial Quilt. So if you don't know about that project, then I do encourage you to check it out. The piece of the wood that was shown on the fire scars is actually up in our Idaho treeing lab still. And then lastly, remember that like most of the materials that you got were sourced from just scrap fabric. So thinking about how that we're also producing art that is
Eco art.
Eco art, yeah, in so many ways. With that, let's give Stacy another round of applause. Thank you all so much, and that's it. Have a wonderful day. Take rest. We have Sandy. Oh, thank you, Sandy, so much. Why would you hit